Um, John, do you think if you unmute yourself, it might work? Hello, Anna. So glad you could join us. Do we have any
Hello,
students?
my name is Alicia Quim. I am with the Premier Program. Today, I am presenting the Families Panel on Transition to School for their Children with Disabilities. I am honored to present the families that are participating in this panel. Carolyn and Preston, Taylor and Jaylena, Cynthia and Jacob. Tell us about your NICU survivor and what makes your child a special needs child.
Is Preston Ebel. He was 40 weeks. Everything was perfectly fine with the pregnancy. His cord prolapsed during birth, which caused asphyxiation, and he is a HIE, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy kiddo. And so that put him in the NICU. He was on ice, sweeties. They put him on the cooling blanket to cool him down and to stop because he had seizures within the first 24 hours of life. I can't remember how many, there was enough. And so he was going apneic. It was very, very touch and go, very scary. And so he was in the NICU for 11 days. And when we left the NICU, we knew that based upon an MRI that he had scarring on his corpus callosum. He'll be 6 next month. Well, it's a laundry list of them, but ultimately he mixed tone cerebral palsy. So they've kind of put it out in different things, but it's mixed tone cerebral palsy. He has spasticity and dystonia, specifically dystonia in his hands and his mouth, which creates a lot for his upper trunk. That's the big booger bear of him being able to have good control and function.
Hi, my name is Taylor, and my daughter is Jaylena Rachel De La Rosa. She is 8 years old. I had her whenever I was 18. I was 25 weeks. She weighed 490 grams. Um, she is now 8 years old, and she has an intellectual disability. She has a visually impaired and also has ADHD.
My NICU survivor is Jacob Ledesma. Jacob is a twin, and my twins were born at 28 and 6/7, and they had a condition known as twin to twin anemia polycythemia, which Jacob was the donor and John was the recipient. Jacob was born with APGARs of 2, 4, and 4 and was intubated for 1 week on a high flow vent. On the 4th week of being in NICU, we had our head ultrasound, which we had not identified a bleed prior. But in the 4th ultrasound, we saw what's called paraventricular leukomalacia, and in this, it's where the brain doesn't look normal in appearance. And so, with that diagnosis, usually at age 2, some children do develop CP, and Jacob did develop CP, cerebral palsy. He has spastic diplegia affecting his lower limbs, and he also is an epileptic child. And so those were his diagnoses that have led him into all these special needs therapies and resources. Is his cerebral palsy that he was diagnosed with.
In the state of Texas, children with disabilities ages 3 to 21 are entitled to receive a free and appropriate public education. Were you aware of the Early Childhood Special Education Program, formerly known as PPCD? Was this program recommended for your child?
Jacob was in therapy from age 1 to 3 with a company named Easter Seals, and after that, there was a transition to go for about 2 hours to a school closest to our home. But unfortunately, with only being at school 2 hours, having a bus route, having somebody to physically be there to get my son, having a twin that could not attend, it just made it very challenging for those that were involved in our childcare while me and my husband worked. So unfortunately, Jacob didn't have a transition at that period. His transition was from Easter Seals age 3 to actually going into kindergarten, is where we did our transition for education for Jacob.
I was where we started ECI as far as therapies go very early on. And so I was aware of, I know they changed the name. It was always PPCD as far as my world goes. I didn't realize they had changed the name. But I was aware of it. I chose not to do it because we were getting so much full-time therapy coming to the house or access to clinics pre-COVID, of course, to going to clinics that even the therapists that were with us did not see that there would be value that I wasn't already bringing to the table with services we already had going for him going to PPCD.
I ended up finding Avance on my own, and ECI ended up going to the school to resume services through there. When she turned 3, she ended up going to public education through Early Head Start program. From there, her first year, they saw a speech delay. They knew she wasn't catching on. They also saw that she had an attention span very short. So they recommended me go to the doctor and get her checked out and stuff. They started speech therapy services, and at the age of 3, they prescribed her um, ADHD medication.
How difficult was the transition to the school district for services? What barriers do you face and how do you overcome them? Did anyone provide you assistance or help? For example, your primary care physician or ECI?
The process from the transition to Avance to Early Head Start through the school district was fairly easy. Avance helps me with finding the paperwork, finding the school, finding the open house when they were doing everything. And then I went to the school district, and they actually helped me out through the application and told me everything that I needed to get her in as quick as possible.
Jacob's transition from home to his first year of school, which was going to be the start of kindergarten, was a very difficult, not only difficult and challenging, but also provided a lot of anxiety for myself and my husband, because we hadn't had him in any childcare through his whole life. And once you have a special needs and he's in diapers and there are certain things that can put him in safety, or concerning safety issues such as falling, I think that brings a lot of anxiety when you start making that transition, because you're just not sure how well they're going to take care of your child. You also don't know, is he going to have one-to-one assistance? And so definitely there's a lot of questions that we as parents have at the forefront of that transition. I can say with the school district that my son went to, they definitely had a conversation with me, but I also felt like it was a need for me to write a letter on his first day on what he liked, what he disliked, and then maybe how to get him to get interest in a certain activity. And it was like really get to know my child, because I feel like in that transition you have very limited time, because he's not the only special kid in these special ed classrooms. There's other people, and in our situation there's a lot of other children in my son's current class that need a little more help. And so for me it was very much stressful, and I think what helped me in that transition was really sending them a picture with my son, and a kind of bio on him, just so they knew what to stay focused on.
The transition to the public school system was a void of nothing. That's just the best way to say it. No one prepared me for anything. There was no assistance. And I probably a lot of good intentions, but there was no assistance from the primary care. came to this transition, there was nothing preparing me for the lingo, the testing, the process, none of it. And so I walked in, and I may not to toot my horn, but I didn't come to this with no education and no experience. I was an Army wife. I've been thrown into the thick of it and had to swim many times. So I've already came prepared with the toolbox, if you will. And especially having been that he was, going into kindergarten when we first started this, I've been around enough and fought enough battles to get him therapies, to fight with insurance companies. So it's not like I didn't have a basis of understanding walking in. I came in with everything I had, and nothing could have prepared me for, oh, these are all the different evaluations, and this is what all this means. And yeah, that's therapy outside of school, but this is what therapy is inside of school. And this is what you need to get an aid. And this is what you're going to need for AAC. None of that. I called the school system and said, I've got a kiddo. And thank goodness that the person that I ended up talking to was a gal by the name of Judy Bryant. She's up here at the Birdville ISD. She became an employee because she was that mom that everybody couldn't wait for her kids to graduate, because she was just that booger bear. And as far as the SPED program was, that they're like, we need to give her a job because we need her to make sure that all that stuff's done, because we don't want to deal with that mom again. She was, within. So I talked to her and was like, my biggest concern just is not that my son can't learn, because we have no learning challenges. I knew that walking in the door. It was that he would not be able to be heard and understood.
In the school district, the Admission Review and Dismissal Committee is responsible to determine the eligibility for services and to develop the individualized education program for the child. After the child is evaluated, parents meet with the ARD committee to make the decision for placement. Please tell us your experience with these meetings.
During our first ARD in the school district, and Jacob was in kindergarten, I can recall that there was a lot of information given over an hour. It was way over an hour, my first meeting. And in that meeting, you have a lot of people that attend, everybody who is part of Jacob's care during the school time. And so I really didn't know much background. They do provide you every time you go to an ARD with the booklet, but I never had real time to read it. I didn't even know what my options were outside of what they were telling me. But one year I did have to call for an advocate, and there are advocates here in San Antonio that you can reach out to, but they do charge a fee, and it's an hourly fee. They kind of meet with you before to discuss what your questions are, and then they are a support if you want them to go to the meeting with you. You do have to ask permission prior to the ARD to let them know that you're bringing an advocate in. I think that for me was really very beneficial in providing me what my rights were, what general education versus special education meant. How do we do inclusion? I knew I wanted my child to partake in a regular kindergarten classroom with his twin brother, but I also knew my son had challenges, so I didn't know what my rights were, or what options I did have to provide the best education that I could provide for him, because I do see that in a special needs classroom, the classroom setting is very small, more one-to-one, but then I wanted him to have that also with the regular classroom, bigger class, more friends, social environment. And so definitely sitting with the advocate allowed me to get more information on what my son had rights to in the school district. But unfortunately, I find it kind of sad that it's only those that are fortunate that can pay to have an advocate. And so how do we provide that information to families at the forefront prior to the meeting or prior to be given the book, so we all know what our children's can receive in the academic year, and what their rights are. And so we were fortunate to do it, and we were definitely heard at the end of the meeting. So many changes came from that. And we developed a great plan, and I feel that at every ARD even following that, all the teachers really make sure that you understand before you leave, as well as you're in agreement. But when you don't know what your options are, you tend to just agree with the plan, not really knowing what your resources are. And so I definitely think that there needs to be somewhat more resources for us parents prior to an ARD meeting.
Jaylina was first having her art meeting for speech therapy. She was 3 years old. I didn't understand any of what was going on. I just knew they were going to give her services for how long. I didn't really understand the goals. And then when she went into, at the end of pre K 4, she was evaluated for intellectual disability. Um, that was a little bit more, um, I didn't comprehend absolutely anything. I just knew she was about 2 or 3 years behind of what she's supposed to be at. Then she transitioned. She ended up getting labeled as intellectual disability, and then she transitioned into kinder. She fell so behind in kinder because she was still in general population. I would, at the art meetings, I would um, say my concerns, say she's not understanding anything. They would just keep going with the meeting, even though I had concerns. Come first grade, um, she was even worse, and she was starting to get picked on because how far behind she was. So I ended up getting an advocate for her, and the advocate helped me put her into special ed, and the special ed teacher would actually evaluate her in the general population before she got accepted, and agreed that she belongs in there full time more than general population.
When we scheduled the um, corral crazy 3 hours of 5 adults on one child, they're asking me questions, I asking me questions, he's trying to talk to me, he's hanging back. It was 3 hours of just like the craziest thing on the planet. We put a almost 5-year-old through this and expected that to be a good understanding of what he did and did not know. They were insistent he didn't understand pronouns. I'm like, yes, he does. Well, he didn't do it for the test. And it was a corral where it's like, there's no way they could have listened to him and understood him and spoken to me at the same time. No way. So in 3 hours, his initial assessment, that when I got the first IEP sent to me, I cried because he doesn't understand pronouns. Yes, he does. He doesn't understand this. On paper, he was an absolute mental challenge, put him in the classroom, stick him in the corner, kiddo, and that's not my baby. And that's not what he showed in that room either. But and even in the document, it said, because there are communication challenges, do not use this data to let it skew your decision making. And they did. The document even said, don't do that. And so his goals were ridiculous, insulting, beneath him, beneath me, beneath the process. And then the school they chose for him was not safe. The playground had no business, because they never intended for a child with special needs to be on that playground. So I had to fight for that. And then when I looked at that, even though I knew I could call Judy and I believed I could understand she'd help me, I was talking to my girlfriend, who is his speech therapist. She was like, you need an advocate. This is ridiculous. So I hired an advocate. Not everybody can do that, has those resources. And truly, when she showed up, all of a sudden everything went into play. Did she do something massively challenging that I probably couldn't have gotten on my own? No, but she knew the right questions to ask. I don't know evaluations. All of a sudden she's asking for these evaluations and looking at his not qualification, but Oh, eligibility. No one had ever explained to me what the word eligibility meant. I was like, he has cerebral palsy. That's not his eligibility. What do you mean that's not his eligibility? There's a whole lingo that, and it takes advantage of moms and dads so they don't know what to ask for. It's done on purpose. And I will say that in front of every school board on the planet. And so I couldn't even answer that question. So if I can't answer that question, how could I ever advocate for my son? And no one said, here, mom, read this. I would have read that. I hired the translator known as the advocate, and she's scary. She's nice, but she's scary, and I'm glad. And so for my first art, to kind of transition to that, my first art, I got to be a girl. I was crocheting, so I didn't speak, you know? And so we had already gone through what I wanted. And what I didn't realize is that things I was trying to ask for were literally arguing him into the pull out, because I didn't understand. To me, mom wants to see reading goals. Mom wants to see math goals, because that's what I think. I've raised other kids. I want to see he can read. But if there's a goal, that means there's a deficiency. Another key thing that I didn't understand. Oh, if there's only one goal in that IEP, that's fine. And there's got to be data to back it up. Didn't know that. How are you going to collect data? What's data? Why is this? Why is this? So she argued for 7 new evaluations done, music therapy, this, got him changed to orthopedic impairment, helped me get him a full aid all the time. So I got everything I wanted. And truly, I believe that the school district would probably have given me, if I didn't have her, if I knew how to argue right? I do believe they were on my side in heart, but she knew how to bring it in the teeth and how to get it on paper. And so I don't have any issues now.
Do you have any additional challenges once your child is started to attend school?
No, because the IEP was so thorough and so clear, and we had already thought about how is he going to go to lunch, and how is this going to happen, and how is that going to happen. And we had that training meeting prior to school starting. I think that's a very clear thing, that I sat down not only with his teacher, the principal, the vice principal, all the therapists, his aide, his backup aide, because something I brought up that had not been brought up before in other arts was, what happens if there's a school shooter drill or a school shooter? Who's got my baby? I want names. I want them on paper. Fire drill, tornado drill. Who has my baby and where are they? He is getting OT, PT, and speech 1 time a week, every week. And then he's also that's pull out at minimum, push in maximum. So if they don't have to pull him out, pretty much speech is the only one where they have to pull him out, just because of the nature of the therapy. It's really challenging to do that with every friend that's in the building.
Once he started school, I think the biggest challenge for my son and his needs were physical therapy, because Jacob does use devices for assistance. He does not walk independently. He has a wheelchair for long distance, and he has a K walker for short distances. And then he also has AFOs. And I think my challenge was, how do we incorporate more of the K walker for a child who never had gone to childcare and basically was in a home environment his whole life, for the first 5 years, to be making him mobile to play with his friends. And I think that was the challenging part. How do we do that transition? I know he's getting tired. I know we need to provide the wheelchair, but how do we also have the goal of him being able to ambulate for longer distances? I think a challenge that recently occurred is that he wants to play with his peers. So you know, as a district, you want them, our special children, to play with the general population of the kids in the same grade. And so they were allowing my son to play with other classmates, but crawling, because that's the form of how he moves around in our house, is usually by crawling. And so he does this, so he thinks that he can play more by crawling. But as a parent, I don't want my child on the ground because there's a lot of germs, and you know, he puts his hands in his mouth. And so I definitely felt that there was a challenge on how could we meet in the middle. It was to, in order for us to do this transition, Jacob was probably going to be upset because he had been allowed on the ground to play with his peers. But I just have to say, you mentioned your goals to the teachers, to those involved, and you know, there was great feedback that was provided back. We discussed it in a platform that not only the PT was involved, but his teachers were involved, and it was just really took a lot of repetition. But I'm glad that, you know, we did have this challenge, but I was heard. And since then we moved to using the walker 100% and during gym time. So definitely there are challenges. The other one I feel is what I thought my child was getting in school is not necessarily what he is getting. So physical therapy at school is really just making sure he has what he needs to be able to move around. They make sure that he moves around in a safe environment. But where you have PT at home, that's more working on independent walking, and those goals, as far as stretching, really are incorporated in other therapies that people either go to or at home and not within the school district. So I think that too maybe should have been provided more clear information on what the specialties mean in a school district versus specialties what they mean in the outside world of home health or other therapies that go to home or to wherever you attend to.
The challenges that I had came across was more when she was in pre-K 4. Um, the teacher, I would express my concerns to her, and she would just tell me it's because she's little, or she'll get it later on. She later ended up agreeing that some of getting her evaluated for intellectual disability, and that was mainly because of the speech therapist at Edgewood Early Child Child Head Start. And then when she transitioned to elementary school, um, it was not as bad, but they were, she's getting it, but she's not getting it. And I would tell them that she's getting picked on, or she's coming home crying because she's not understanding work is hard. Um, she just, she would just sit there in class and not do nothing, and the teacher didn't find that alarming. Um, Whenever we would go to do the art meetings, um, for speech, we would talk about everything, and nobody thought about putting her into special ed. They just kept rolling with it. So, come first grade, it was worse for her. She didn't want to go to school. Um, she was acting out. I hired an advocate to speak on my behalf because I didn't really understand on what I was asking for or what she needed. So she spoke up and said that she needs to go to special education. And the special education teacher got involved and started monitoring her in general class and agreed that she needs to be in special ed. She should have been there a long time ago, and that general population wasn't doing any good for her. It was actually hurting her.
We're still facing a pandemic that started in March 2020. Tell us, how has COVID impacted the services your child receives through the school district? Has the district provided any accommodations?
The pandemic definitely has provided challenges to myself and my husband and Jacob in our home. The 1 year that the school district ended up closing and doing virtual learning was very complicated in our home, since we had two children attending the same grade, same classroom. In a school setting, Jacob has an assistant right next to him. kind of redirecting him. And unfortunately, in my home, my mom assisted us with virtual learning. Her thing was, I'm here to take care of your kids. I'm not here to be a teacher. And so she really didn't have the time to sit right next to Jacob to redirect him. So while John was trying to, his twin brother was trying to be in this classroom sharing the same computer, you would see Jacob hitting John in class. You would see Jacob going off, I don't even know where, crawling in the living room. And so what ended up happening with Jacob, he just wouldn't attend class. So the special education department provided about 20 minutes a day, because that's the only focus they could get from him, was 20 minutes without somebody sitting right next to him. And definitely was challenging for those teachers as well, because their solution was that we find somebody to sit next to him during that period. But with two parents that are working full-time jobs and a grandmother who's just helping us, it definitely was challenging. That I can say, for the year that they didn't go in person, not only did they both fall behind, but Jacob really didn't attend any school. And so his environment was just watching TV and maybe playing on the computer. But as far as attending any class time to learn any curriculum, there wasn't any. It was just too difficult. So definitely we had to make a decision to let him go back to school. Once he went back to school, I have to say 100%, I maybe should have looked at it a little differently. And instead of holding him 2 semesters, maybe I should have sent him a little sooner, because definitely the impact of that, what the school district provides inside the school, is no comparison to virtual learning at home. And so I can say it definitely impacted him. We fell behind. He probably curriculum wise could have been a lot more advanced at this point, but we're still catching up. And so definitely was challenging. And there weren't really any resources that were provided to us other than, here's a laptop, here's an iPad, have somebody log him in at this time for 20 minutes. He did have speech class with his twin brother. Again, there was a lot of, hitting during class time, not paying attention. Then we were asked to separate them at different times. But again, making sure someone in my home could electronically log him in became a little challenging as well. So Jacob unfortunately missed a lot of those sessions. So definitely was challenging during the pandemic for us, special parents of special needs kids.
It hasn't affected it too much. It was affecting whether I was going to send him to school in the first place. We'd done all the IEP work, we'd had the ARD, we had all of that, and then school fake coming, and it's like, who's going to wear a mask, who's not going to wear a mask, who's going to be around my son, and can I even dictate that? And I couldn't. There's no legal document that's going to override the state mandates or lack therein. And so it was do I put him in school or do I not? Do I do online school? Because they had an online option, at least for the first 6 weeks. And I had volunteered to have Preston put in there because I hadn't really I was scared. I was so scared that, that he was going to be put more at risk than necessary. And so the school said that, gave me promises as best they could that everyone would be masked that wanted to be, and that every precaution would be taken that they could legally do. So not everyone was masked around him. They did work with me on the fact that I did not want him anywhere near the lunchroom. I was like, that is a petri dish on a non-COVID day. And so they made accommodations that he could stay in the classroom and eat there, which is also good for his nutritional support, because he burns calories so much faster, and all the walking and the moving, his weight was starting to go down on the growth chart. So it was actually better that he has longer time, so he didn't have to leave the classroom. He just stays where he is, and he has longer time to eat. So that was 100% better. So they made that accommodation that limited his exposure to unmasked people as best as possible, so he could keep his own. That was it. That has been a big deal. That was probably the biggest thing, is that. And then snack time, because everyone has snacks. So does he have to leave the classroom or not? By allowing me to put I keep calling it a fan. It's an ultraviolet light filter, HEPA mega filter, kills viruses. By allowing that in the classroom, then his classroom is the 100% safest place in the school building.
Since COVID started, whenever it first happened and they sent everybody to the online virtual learning, Jaylena's academic, I guess, actually decreased. She forgot a lot of the stuff that she learned. So when coming back, she had to relearn everything all over again. She picked it up a little bit better. She's actually progressing a lot since being back at school. Um, Home therapy actually was almost non-existent. Um, we would do it over Zoom, and the Jelena just didn't find that like attention to listen to the teachers because she wasn't there. So we stopped that, and then um, it ended up, oh, she's reaching her goals, and I didn't understand how she was reaching her goals when she wasn't really working. But I ended up just stopping the services because it wasn't beneficial to her anymore, and it was more hurting her to try to get her to stay seated down to do the tasks that they're asking. So I stopped the home, and then when school had their therapy time, they would just send worksheets or ask if I wanted to do a worksheet or if they think she would benefit in doing a class. Then they gave me some material to work with her on our own. Um, but since being back from COVID, she's is actually excelling. Um, she is doing good with her therapies in school, and she is mastering most of her goals.
Based on your personal experience in transitioning your child into the school district, what would you like to see change to improve the process for other families in similar situations?
That the public education program would pay a little more attention to placing of the children. My daughter fell through the cracks for 3 years until I got an advocate to speak for her, to actually be placed in the program, to be placed in the special needs unit where she belonged.
What I think would be beneficial for us parents of special needs kids is having some kind of class or information time prior to school starting, prior to kindergarten, if our kids have not even started school, to give us basically definitions and the background of what an ARD meeting is, as well as informing us what inclusion means. And just maybe other parents being able to speak to us on their transition, because again, this is overwhelming for us parents when we have to send our special needs child to a school that's not going to be able to provide one-to-one with our children. And so I just think a lot of more information prior to the start time of school would definitely be beneficial, so that we all know the same language and we're all receiving the same resources for our children.
For sure. When I first made contact with the district, so it was just for looking on the school side only, they send you this safeguarding your child and the IEP and this legal document that says nothing about actually what mom's going to be involved in. So what does the process even look like? Step 1, step 2, step 3, in layman's term, not legalese, a layman's document. And if a parent needs to come up with it, then a parent needs to come up with it, and get approval, of course, but this is speaking to the parent. In that document, what are all of the evaluations that are available? Because how my son gets, I'm not going to say everything, but everything I asked for, and another kid that doesn't have me as a mom doesn't get an aid, and they literally are more wheelchair bound than my son is. I'm like, how has Preston got a full-time aid and Addie that is nonverbal 100% doesn't? Same state, the advocate. That's the difference. That's not fair. That sure is not in fate by any means, right? And so, like, what are the evaluations? What did these words mean? Kind of a common lingo this is what eligibility means, and this is what this means. And don't expect mom to all of a sudden become, fluent. So having those like at least little bits so that communication can happen, because the biggest fallacy with communication is to assume it happens. You and I are talking, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're understanding me. So they, as a group of people at mom, that doesn't mean she understands a thing that was just said. And if there isn't common lingo and a way that everybody can access what those common words are, we're on different planets.
Okay. Turn your video on.
Yeah, perfect. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. I just wanted to say thank you to all the mommies that participated in this video. And we do have Mrs. Essel and Mrs. Ledesma here with us. If anybody in the wants to ask a question directly to them, this is the time to do it. I was going through the comments, and yes, I do think that a lot of the language that it's used is definitely, it's a barrier for these parents. Dr. Duncan was suggesting that maybe doing an advocate workshop for the families where advocates can come and talk to the parents to teach them some of this, what it means. So let's see.
Some more questions.
Okay. Just trying to see if there's any questions. Oh, so Carrie wants to know how much are the advocates typically? Do any of you two know the cost of the advocates?
Yeah, the advocate that I used, really, we didn't pay that much because of how easy the process ended up being, but it was like an initial 150. And she has, I can't remember her hourly rate, but it was initial 150 just to kind of start the process. And then she would just deduct from that. And then it was X amount per hour. Since we were in the time of COVID, and I'm trying to think how much, I think it was $50 an hour. I think that feels good. I know I wrote a $150 check, but we never had to write another penny. I never had to write another penny just because of how thorough the process was and how much, as soon as I hired her, everything just went into place. So in the time of COVID, of course, everything was Zoom, which really reduced the cost, because I think prior to Zoom Town, she would have been traveling to attend ours and would have been traveling, and then it would have been on us to have reimbursed her for her cost. But since that wasn't a factor, then it really reduced the cost.
Mine was $75. I paid the initial about $135, $150, and then $75 per hour. And we ran 2 hours when I had her. So the 150 was just a consult. What are your questions? Let me align what we're gonna present. Let me do the talking. Give me his schedule. Tell me where you want to see the inclusion. And then right when I walked in that I had her represent me, they gave me a new schedule with the inclusion already. But she stayed there for the 2 hours. But I really think that was a statement. And like she says, if you're the parent with a loud mouth, you're going to be heard. But unfortunately, in his classroom, not unfortunately, the little girl benefited from my arts, because then there was another little girl that was then included in inclusion for the first period. And I felt like my meeting is what got her in inclusion with him in that class, because they shared the same para. But so unfortunate that child would not have had the inclusion had I not paid. And I think that's the sad part.
Yeah. So we have another question. This one comes from Dr. Gon. He would like to know what healthcare providers can do to help you prepare for the school process.
Oh, that's hard as far as from the healthcare perspective. My husband is also a family medicine physician. And so he, I can see it from the healthcare provider's perspective because there's just so much of like, I talked quite a bit, the lingo of getting mom that understanding. It's helping to connect to resources, and resources really being a list of advocates. And it's kind of like, here, parent, here's some more money you need to go spend. But if it hadn't been for the speech therapist connecting me with an advocate, that word just seemed almost unreachable. I had her cell phone number and it was personal at that moment. And so through the, especially with the Nest Clinic, the relationships that I developed with the healthcare providers through those that, from birth to, here and during this transition, being able to have gotten a list of people or a list, the advocate that I used, specialneedsboss.com is her website. And she's got classes and information and books and things that are at least, things that are for free to be able to have a parent be able to get their hands on, to have that as a part of, and again, maybe a parent needs to come up with this or, with the committee of having that. What is the flow chart? I never saw a flow chart. And so if that could be given in like, that transition, that, 5-year-old appointment, right? Here is, you're going into the special ed, this is what to expect. Each district may be different, but at least a broad strokes. This is what'll happen, and this is what'll happen, and this is what'll happen. So at least it takes some of the anxiety out.
What was that website again?
Okay.
Specialneedsboss.com.
Special needs.
Wow.
Bravo, October, Sierra, boss, BOSS.
Maybe you can type it on the chat. That might help.
And she's local Texas. I think she's in the Houston area is where she's based. But she has an academy, etc. that I have friends that are here that have paid to do. You can take classes, from her. And so, I didn't have the time. We had 3 weeks from the time it was need an advocate to ARD. And so, but that's how fast she moved. That's I was in absolute agony over this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde feeling, bipolar feeling. When I talked to people on the phone, they were wonderful. But then when I looked at the paperwork, they were scary and gonna do everything against my child. And how am I supposed to rectify that?
I think for me, somebody overheard a conversation. I was struggling, and then he emailed me and said, "Hey, my wife knows an advocate," and that's where it started. I didn't even know about this advocacy, and I'm in the medical field. But I think what physicians could do, maybe questions to prepare us to ask the district before school starts. Like some parents don't even know what to start, what to ask. What does inclusion mean? What paperwork needs to be done? My son's epileptic too. I didn't know that I needed a seizure plan before school, and I'm trying to get the paperwork later. And so, I think it's great, like she said, maybe put a committee with physicians and ourselves and other parents and come up with like a template of some sort, so that parents have somewhere to go to pull the resources or to be provided. Maybe parents don't have computers at home, but being printed, at your well child checkup when you know that the child's going to enter school. So definitely resources.
Perfect. And so there is another question in here that they're wanting to find out if you guys had any service coordinator or case managers through your insurance company that assisted you with this transition, or any additional resources that you may have found.
No.
And then we have my work health insurance, and she called me once, but it was very hard to get her back. Because we were being delayed on devices that he needed, still being delayed. And she said she'd help me, but it just became a circle of trying to get connected with her again.
I think the only thing that would be considered a resource, I kind of mentioned it in my movie, that's really made it be so super duper seamless, is that meeting that I had prior to school starting, that had every single person in the school that was going to be overseeing and or assisting my child in one room with me on center stage with him there, that I could demonstrate his AAC device. This is how you do this. This is how you this is how I want you to use this. These are his AFOs. This is how we're going to go to the bathroom. This is how I'm going to do his lunch. I had them for 2.5 hours. That was my training session. And that has been cited multiple times by the aide, by the teacher, that allowed them to already have, prior to the day one classroom, have the classroom, have the systems, Preston ready. And the experience that they've had with our little family has templated to the principal on how she wants to do special needs families, just because how seamless it was. And that was a combination of the district gal that I cited in the video, me, the advocate mentioning in that that there needed to be a training session to teach the communication partner to use the AAC device, because he's verbal and he's verbal, kinda, to where, but that nonverbal part of communicating, what does he know? How does he write? What does he do this? And here I come with an AAC device and use it. Okay, how? How is it supposed to be used, right? So instead of playing catch up, it's allowed him to have assessments to where he's accelerating through the reading at pace to faster than his peers, because the AAC device was in place from day one and has been used in all of his assessments the right way. I've come back in several times for guest appearances during practice assessment time so that I can show them how I would use it, so then they can take it and run with it. That level of partnership with the on-site people is so key to our success. That's of course something I know because of what our needs are per se, but it has that needs to be standard.
Yeah, it sounds like a protocol needs to take place to help all parents transition their children into the school district. I think we're
very true. Oh, sorry. It's very true, like you stated in your the interview, like they test him a certain way, and I know that I got very upset because his injury was located in his parietal lobe, and so you ask him a question, you have to pause, maybe rephrase the question, and then he'll get it right. But she's telling me it has to be phrased this way, and it's only phrased this one time, and you do get the reading of it written out, and it looks like my son's mentally retarded. That's basically verbiage that they use. And you're like, no, he can communicate. He just can't write on paper, but he can verbally communicate with you. But she's like, he can't get a point because he didn't answer after the first question. I mean, you have to also understand these people that are caring for our children are teachers. They're not medical, and they don't know where the injury is and how to interpret that. So I think definitely education amongst us parents and the teachers, vice versa, needs to start somewhere.
Agreed.
Communication and understanding the language, the big plus. Okay, I think we're getting ready to go to break now. Do we have any more questions?
Do you want to
from the
talk about?
audience?
One thing as far as like that in the healthcare setting, we're taught by our healthcare providers what our diagnoses are. We can rap those diagnoses out like rapid fire, right? But we aren't taught about what eligibility means. And so in the clinic, the direct healthcare to parent on what's going to be the transition to school, I think that might be the key thing that healthcare providers listening to me now, y'all need to teach us what eligibility for the classroom means. And that's like, but that's not my role, but that's our diagnosis. The minute we cross into the school, your diagnosis doesn't mean anything. What is your eligibility? Because that's what you get services on. That's what you get therapies on. That's what you get attention on. So somewhere in that crossover, don't we have educators that may have access to the list of stuff, because Preston was other healthcare impairment, which is a blanket of anything we don't have, when he needed to be orthopedic. because his biggest thing is manipulating around the world is his biggest thing. So that needing the aid, him not being able to physically manipulate around the school, ambulate around the school, gets me the aid. And so there's power in the knowing what your eligibility is and insisting on the change, because only the advocate brought that to the table. And so mama comes in already knowing what her eligibilities, probably plural, are. I think that immediately shifts the sands of, oh, mama knows, to we're going to listen to her. And it also empowers mom to know what ground she's got to stand. And I say mom because usually it falls on mom, although there are dads that do fill this role very, very well.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that
Taylor.
Miss Taylor wasn't here today because she had a family emergency. So that's why she couldn't be part of the panel. Any other thoughts, Ms. Ledesma, that you'd like to add before we end the session?
Can I get in?
Oh.
All right. Thank you for allowing us parents on the panel. And I just hope to be on this panel to make a difference and to get one person, one of the teachers that are on here or the therapists or just some insight, and just we need to do better for our kids in the school district. And so power, like she said.
Okay, thank you very much. I do want to highlight that Taylor Escobar, who's Jeleena's mom, she was not able to make the panel, but she does have a very a powerful story in that her child was there was 3 years that was lost in her child's education, even though when she finished from our program at age 5, we knew she had the intellectual disability and so forth. So we need to learn how to figure out what eligibility is instead of medical diagnosis. We have time for a 10-minute break. At 2:10, we will start the video for the educators panel, and then we will have a Q&A after that. And please, if you have questions, put it in the chat so we can streamline this process. And I know that these parents are going to have some questions for our educators. Thank you very much. 10-minute break. Be back at 2:10.